Welcome to another episode of Prophetic Perspective. I'm Anthony from the Revelation Bros, and this is going to be covering week ending June 2nd. As usual, we're going to cover some news articles and discuss the prophetic impact or the biblical aspect of what we should be looking for as we read through the news. The first thing I want to look at is the topic of weather. The U.S. storm season is astounding, expert warns, is the first article we're going to look at. And a quick snippet from this says William Bunting, Deputy Director of the National Weather Service's Storm Prediction Center, said the astounding tally of more than 1,000 tornadoes so far this year can be traced in part to particularly warm water in the Gulf of Mexico, which has set the stage for massive tornadic storms in the nation's midsection. So again, more people sounding off about an extraordinarily severe storm season in the U.S. Let's continue on here. Another article from Weather says why tornadoes are hitting the U.S. harder and more often. It goes on to speak of how we have a stretch of unrelenting severe weather, and it's unusual that we have not had a day without a severe weather warning in the U.S. since late April 24th of this year. It says that the trend line over the past 10 years shows an uptick in severe weather, and they blame this on climate change, which the secular society will continue to clamor that climate change and global warming have been the culprit for why weather is going to be out of control. They don't understand the biblical narrative of birth pains and how Jesus warned us that the earth would literally become volatile as we approach his soon return. Let's continue here. Another article says tornado hurricane seasons this year could be historically active. Again, this talks about how we've had 800 tornadoes so far this year, and the NOAA is warning of a historically active hurricane season. If you have noticed the theme, this being the third prophetic perspective I've done so far, the theme is bad storms, potentially devastating hurricane season this year. And let's look at the final article, which is U.S. hurricane warning, tropical threat to spark glut of freakishly powerful storms. A little snippet says a tropical threat in the Caribbean will kick-start a hair-raising hurricane season amid warnings of a glut of freakishly powerful storms, unusually warm weather temperatures with El Nino transitioning to a La Nina in the eastern Pacific will provide the perfect ingredients to fuel the assault. Hurricanes this year threaten to not only be more powerful, but more likely to make landfall, experts warn. So, that is several articles from last week, again reiterating I'm trying to think of the correct word here, the continuum of experts in the atmospheric and weather centers warning of a continuing severe weather season, followed by a potentially devastating hurricane season. Now, this is biblically prophetic because, like we said in a previous prophetic perspective, Jesus warned that in the last days there would be signs in the sky. We just had an eclipse. We've had prior eclipses to that. And those signs in the sky would give rise to the waves and the seas roaring. And when you dig into this, into the original Koine Greek language, you find out that the waves and the sea roaring refer to tempests, which are extreme storms of wind and rain. And so that fits the bill for a hurricane. If you go back to 2017, we discussed how after the 2017 eclipse, we had the costliest hurricane season in U.S. history, headlined by Hurricane Harvey that dumped a tremendous amount of rain on the city of Houston, Texas. So that is our weather portion of our prophetic perspective from last week. So again, this is a continuing echo that we are potentially in the crosshairs of a very rough summer weather season, heading into a potentially devastating hurricane season. And this is also highlighted by the fact that we just had the April 8th eclipse, and what the previous eclipse brought is a bad omen, so to speak, for what the hurricane season could be this year. Let's continue on in war and conflict. We have one article here that I'm going to look at that talks about how Sudan's army rejects the U.S. call to return to peace talks. Sudan is a traditionally Islamic country in the northern part of Africa. And why this is significant is Sudan was set last year to sign normalization with Israel. They had signed on the Abraham Accords agreeing to normalize relations, but prophetically, we know that Sudan is a part of the Ezekiel 38 nations that will invade Israel. So the fact that they were set to bring peace between them and Israel, and now they are in a civil war as of April of last year, and there's two factions fighting for control of the nation, is tells a biblical narrative of potentially Sudan turning to an anti-Israel stance again, lining up with Ezekiel 38. Let's move into Israel and the Middle East. We have a couple articles here to talk about. The first one is Tehran nearing nuclear weapon capability, says new confidential report. This has been a consistent theme of fret for the Israelis and for the world at large, is Iran reaching the nuclear threshold, having a nuclear weapon, and then deciding to make good on all of their threats over these years to wipe out the Zionist regime, which is Israel, and the big Satan, which is the United States. Iran has made no distinction between us and Israel in terms of their desire to erase both of us from the earth, but their priority has always been Israel first, followed by us. And so these reports are continuing to come out saying that Iran is right at the threshold, even so much so that the European community getting ready for an international regulatory like nuclear conference wants to sanction them and try to come against Iran. And our own government here in the U.S. has been vehemently against that. For some reason, we seem afraid to confront Iran over the last 3.5 years with their pursuit of nuclear weapons. That leads into the next article, which says Biden administration presses allies not to confront Iran on the nuclear program. So again, this is a failure as a U.S. nation being the global leader for the free world, as we claim to be, not being willing to deal with what needs dealt with in the Middle East. Whether you love Israel or not, a nuclear Iran will only bring further instability to the Middle East. So from a purely secular viewpoint, it makes no sense to allow Iran to reach their nuclear threshold and make a weapon out of their uranium. And the final article here is just more of an echo. It says Iran's nuclear threshold challenge. Iran is overtly inching closer to the possession of a nuclear weapon, but thus far has refrained from crossing the line. Crucially, Iranian officials are already acting and speaking as if Iran has a threshold nuclear capability, claiming that they possess all the needed technical elements for nuclear weapons. Moreover, they are threatening to acquire nuclear weapons if attacked and expressing satisfaction at the deterrent effect they have already achieved. So this is Iran saying that we already have what we need, and we are choosing not to pursue forward with that. I don't know if I would believe that, and I believe Israel doesn't believe that either based on their actions towards Iran in the Middle East. Let's move into natural disasters. These are all articles from last week, Monday through Sunday, the 2nd. We read new volcanic eruption hits Iceland with town evacuated as lava spews. There's a volcano that erupted again. It had erupted in February and March. It also erupted just last week. So this is 3 volcanic eruptions in this Iceland area. Another article, California sees 5 earthquakes within hours the day after Lake County, Ohio was shaken with an earthquake. So you see the continuing theme of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, both spoken of in the birth pains of the Bible. These are things that we are told will increase in frequency and intensity as we approach the day of Jesus. So these are things that we watch as watchmen to see how these are progressing. Not that we root for natural disasters, but we are to pay attention to them because they are birth pangs telling us how close we're getting. Let's look at a couple political things and then we'll wrap this up. So the first one I want to talk about is South Africa's chief rabbi warning to U.S. about losing continent to Russia, China, and Iran. So there is a rabbi in South Africa who has been, their government has been no friend to the Israelis as they have been trying to persecute them in the UN and the World Court, prosecute them, not persecute, sorry. And this rabbi just warns that America's absence there is only going to lead to further destabilization in Africa, as well as anti-Western values, because the enemies of the West will sweep in and take the vacuum over that we leave. And that's what you're seeing in Sudan and these other nations there. And I think biblically, what is prophetic is that the U.S. at the end is nothing more than a cliff note. And so it makes sense that we're abdicating the areas that we've previously held, which will allow them to move in line for Ezekiel 38 and these end time situations where all nations will be hostile towards Israel. Let's look at another article. Netanyahu, rival launches push to dissolve Israeli parliament amid split over the Gaza war. This is just showing some destabilization in Israel. This is biblically prophetic in the aspect of right now, Israel seems to be on a war footing, but that's because they have a unity government based off of what happened on October 7th. If the government were to break apart, it would force elections, and with a different prime minister in Israel, that could change the narrative very quickly, especially if you get a left-leaning prime minister who would be more open to a two-state solution. That is something I've talked on ad nauseum, and so it is something to pay attention to. Israel is the proverbial watch on God's wrist, and so as goes Israel, as goes the rest of the world, and that's why we watch them very closely. Let's look here. Slovenia to recognize the Palestinian state. So this is another European nation coming forth to recognize the Palestinian people as having their own state. But remember, that will lead into the dividing of Israel, which God will judge nations that do so. So this is something to keep an eye on. These are purely political recognitions. They don't force Israel to do anything, but it's more about creating a constant narrative on the world scene and adding pressure to them to do what the world is clamoring for. And finally, one bit of U.S. news. Donald Trump was convicted, becoming the first U.S. president last week of felony crimes. Now, this is a big deal, not for a political reason, but for the fact of the U.S. being the leader of the free world. I know prophetically, when you look at Scripture, the U.S. is not mentioned. At best, we are a protesting nation in Ezekiel 38. So, who leads the United States? What does that have impact on us as a world leader? And could this be an aspect of the United States stepping off the world stage and allowing these other nations to take the center as we approach the end? These are things that we watch because we know that the United States cannot be the influential military power that is pro-Israel that we currently are for the most part when Ezekiel 38 takes place. And so that is our prophetic perspective for the week ending June 2nd. I hope these are informative. This is meant to give you a summation of kind of the articles that are out there, a sampling, and to help you as a believer to understand the world and what is going on. I pray that these help open your eyes, help you to become a watchman, to talk about these events that are going on with those around you. And as always, remember that we are called to watch. That's what we are focused on here at Revelation Bros. God bless.